Okay, good evening, everybody. The I'm going to say good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. And if you know who is responsible for that comment, you're as old as I am. Okay. So anyway, the first thing we have to do, or would like to do, is introduce any guests that we have here tonight. Um, no. Okay, Barbara. Welcome. Thank you. Do we have any other guests? No. My wife Brenda is here, and I had to drag her out tonight for the simple reason that give her her all your sympathy. Today is her 53rd wedding anniversary. It's my first wife. Yeah. The second, the board and I would like to have some input from all of you, and I don't mean a decision, but an input on how we're going to go forward over the next few months. Um, we have three sessions that we missed, November, December, and January, and we need to make up for them in one way or another. And I've got three different alternatives. One, I'm supposed to lead the one in March, in May rather, where we're going to go over the 2020 election. Ain't going to happen. I'm not going to do that. So we can, I think we've had enough of that. So we can take one of those missing presentations and put it in that. Then we can also expand and have a meeting in June and July and get the other two presentations done. The second alternative, we could have two meetings in April and May, or March and April, whatever. One on the first Wednesday of the month and the normal third, but then we can get those two taken care of. And the third alternative is we could put off the missing two presentations and hand them over to Howard for next season. So these are the three alternatives, at least that I've come up with. Does anybody have any idea what they think would work better for them? Barb? Yeah. Okay. David? Anyone else? Connie? Well, the question for anybody who's outside is, do we need to refund money? We could carry this through to May. Do you have any comment on that, Jim? Yeah, that's
Recall what we talked about was, oh, if you recall what we talked about, I could send this out again, that we reduced this year's dues because we missed a meeting the previous year for some reason, one of maybe the COVID thing. But the second point would be for us to take a look at. I think it would depend on the decision whether we move forward to fill the schedule or not fill the schedule, because the trick is that our dues pay for our meals. So we need the dues to pay for the meals if we have all the meals, but if we have less meals, then certainly we would have less, liability on that end.
It might make sense. That's okay, I'll talk loud.
sure needed for this.
It might make sense to replace the meetings then. It sounds like it's gonna be a complicated math problem if we have to refund money. So either the two meetings for extending the season into June and July makes more sense from a financial perspective, is what I'm thinking.
Anybody? Jack?
I prefer just going right through June and July. I'm looking for chances to connect with people during the summer, and this is a way to do it.
And we may even be able to get more people to show up then. Okay. Go ahead, Jim. Yeah, okay. I think it, that's, we need to support, we need to support the club. They've been very good to us, yeah. Barb, then could you take, you said March and April you couldn't do it. Could you do May? Or June or July? Okay. Well, Mike, can you do any, May or July? Okay, so then I just need to get Sam and Sam Field, because he's the other speaker. And I prefer to get him in May because they go over to the lake from June 1st, and they're not back until October. What's that? Okay. I think we got some ideas of what we can do. Okay. All right. Then I think I got an idea where we can go, Jim. Okay. Thanks. Hold on. The next item is Andy Lowe, who, as you can see, does all of this work for us here, needs help with the audiovisual, I'll call it Zoom work. Is it possible, it's possible he can't be here for all of our sessions, and we need help. We need any volunteers, if anybody who can work with Andy to possibly put this thing together with him or in his absence. Andy, can you have a comment for me?
Most of this stuff is actually, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. So basically, if you can follow color codes, should be pretty easy to get this thing up and running. And then I'll probably also, record a little YouTube video or something, walking this step by step, so we have an idea of, okay, first things do this, do. Okay. So, yeah, if we just, try and get his color coded stuff. Okay.
Okay, so we have two
Yeah, yeah.
possible volunteers, Andy. So it's up to you to just,
The more people who know, the better.
we'll keep him, I don't know whether there are people at home that may also want to volunteer, but if you do, just let Jim Coppinger know. Yes, thank you, Andy. You're it. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Andy. We definitely need you and appreciate it. Yeah. The last item on my business list is we've already mentioned your dues are due. Okay, and we do need to get those paid in. All right. Now. Okay, is Jack ready to go? Hold on.
We're miking him up right
You're miking him up. Okay. In the meantime, the beginning of the week, we sent a email to Jack asking for some bio material so that I could do this introduction. And this is almost a presentation in and of itself that he sent back to me. But in any case, we asked him to send that. And I read over it, and it was actually very fascinating. Jack's history is pretty straightforward. He went to Lehigh for a bachelor's in chemical engineering, then on to the University of Maryland for a PhD in 1967. However, while working for that degree, he became involved in a major sex scandal when he asked a library employee to Xerox an article entitled Heat Transfer in Packed Beds. She refused to be part of a salacious publication and was about to report Jack to her supervisor. Apparently, it was rumored that the article was being submitted to Playboy magazine. So to worm his way out of the scandal, he married the librarian. And by following the instructions in the proposed articles, they produced 2 sons, Sam and Ben. But they had to get the hell out of Baltimore. So they came to the Upjohn Company in Kalamazoo, and he hid in the chemical division for the next 31 years. By the way, he took the oral exam for his PhD, 1, married Carol, 2, and came to the zoo in a single 10-day rush. He was anxious to get out. So as you know, Jack got involved in local politics. He was on the Kalamazoo County Commission and is now finishing his last term on the Kalamazoo City Commission. He was also involved with Isaac and taught chemistry at KVCC. But when I said his bio information was fascinating, it's because he went on at length about his father, who was also a chemical engineer. And there's a connection to that, to this talk tonight. What was your father's first name? Okay. Jim Urban worked on the Manhattan Project in World War II. He was stationed in Hanford, Washington, the massive production facility, where he supervised the production or the purification of plutonium that went into the first atomic bombs. Then later, he worked on using A-bombs as triggers for the detonation of hydrogen bombs. It was his dad who told Jack about the subject of tonight's talk, but he couldn't give him the details. He said, you can read about it in the papers, but I can't tell you anything about it. So when I read Jack's info was about his father, I immediately thought about Brenda and my good friends, Joe and Ann Bader. Brenda majored in chemistry at Trinity College in D.C. She was a year behind the beloved Nancy Pelosi. But Brenda and Ann's father was the labor attaché to the Canadian Embassy. They became very close friends, and 60 some odd years later, they still do FaceTime every week. So after college, Ann married Joe Bader, who had just finished his master's at UVA, their new program for nuclear engineering. So he went on to design nuclear reactors for a while, and then they got shipped by Westinghouse to Geneva, where they were selling nuclear power plants to the Europeans. He did pretty well in France. They now get 70% of their electricity from their nuclear plants, and by the way, they do it with very little nuclear waste. Joe and Ann came back to the States to work for a major engineering outfit, the famous Fluor Corporation. So why am I bothering to mention this? It's because Joe spent years living in the state of Washington in charge of his company's project to try to clean up the nuclear waste mess that Jack's father and his co-workers had created. Okay. Then President Bush, George W., and after him Obama, appointed Joe to the Nuclear Facilities Safety Board. The board's job was to make sure that all the nuclear weapons that his dad and his friends made were not going to be like the subject of tonight's talk. And while Joe was making sure that we had safe nuclear weapons, his wife Ann was in Europe working with American and Ukrainian generals to dismantle that country's nuclear weapons after the Cold War. So Joe's here making atomic bombs. and N is in Europe destroying them. So kind of reminds me of Jim Carville and Mary Madeline. So anyway, unfortunately, our friend Joe died a few years ago, and Brenda and I went to his funeral in D.C., and at his home, after the reception, I saw a photo on the mantle of Joe and the other members of the Nuclear Safety Board all smiling into the camera while they're patting the nuclear warhead in the middle of the picture. Okay. So, but thanks to them, it was a safe nuclear warhead. So, but not like the one we're going to talk about tonight, right? Jack, it's all yours.
Okay, well, let's see if I can make the video part work right here. You know, it goes to sleep, and then it's kind of hard to wake up sometimes. This evening, I'm going to make an assertion that our civilization has lost control of its technology, or is on the path of losing control of its technology. The evidence I'll provide is a metaphorical example. It's the Lewis-Slotin criticality accident. It figures pretty large in the nuclear weapons history of the country, but you may not be familiar with it. First of all, I'm going to show you a video clip of the myth of Daedalus and Icarus to frame the issue in the context of the history of Western civilization. And then I'm going to give you a dramatic, specific example to which I invite you to attach symbolic significance. And this is from the beginning of the atomic age, 1946. Finally, I'm going to show you a copy of a painting by Peter Bruegel and invite you to interpret it with me. So there's kind of like telling you what I'm going to tell you. Okay, so I hope it makes a lasting impression on you. I'm going to start the video now, and we'll see if this can be made to work.
On wings made from wax and feathers, Icarus, the son of Daedalus, defied the laws of both man and nature. Ignoring the warnings of his father, he rose higher and higher. To witnesses on the ground, he looked like a god, and as he peered down from above, he felt like one too. But in mythological ancient Greece, the line that separated God from man was absolute, and the punishment for mortals who attempted to cross it was severe. Such was the case for Icarus and Daedalus. Years before Icarus was born, his father Daedalus was highly regarded as a genius inventor, craftsman, and sculptor in his homeland of Athens. He invented carpentry and all the tools used for it. He designed the first bathhouse and the first dance floor. He made sculptures so lifelike that Hercules mistook them for actual men. Though skilled and celebrated, Daedalus was egotistical and jealous. Worried that his nephew was a more skillful craftsman, Daedalus murdered him. As punishment, Daedalus was banished from Athens and made his way to Crete. Preceded by his storied reputation, Daedalus was welcomed with open arms by Crete's king Minos. There, acting as the palace technical advisor, Daedalus continued to push the boundaries. For the king's children, he made mechanically animated toys that seemed alive. He invented the ship's sail and mast, which gave humans control over the wind. With every creation, Daedalus challenged...
Not yet.
Oh, not yet. Sorry. Sorry, my bad.
Until finally, he broke right through. King Minos' wife, Pasiphae, had been cursed by the god Poseidon to fall in love with the king's prized bull.
Okay, now that part we're going to skip over because this is being broadcast on networks, and it's pretty salacious. So we're going to skip right past that, and we're going to go right to the rest of the show, which is
She conceived and gave birth to the half-human, half-bull Minotaur. This, of course, enraged the king, who blamed Daedalus for enabling such a horrible perversion of natural law. As punishment, Daedalus was forced to construct an inescapable labyrinth beneath the palace for the Minotaur. When it was finished, Minos then imprisoned Daedalus and his only son Icarus within the top of the tallest tower on the island, where they were to remain for the rest of their lives. But Daedalus was still a genius inventor. While observing the birds that circled his prison, the means for escape became clear. He and Icarus would fly away from their prison as only birds or gods could do. Using feathers from the flocks that perched on the tower and the wax from candles, Daedalus constructed 2 pairs of giant wings. As he strapped the wings to his son Icarus, he gave a warning. Flying too near the ocean would dampen the wings and make them too heavy to use. Flying too near the sun, the heat would melt the wax, and the wings would disintegrate. In either case, they surely would die. Therefore, the key to their escape would be in keeping to the middle. With the instructions clear, both men leapt from the tower. They were the first mortals ever to fly. While Daedalus stayed carefully to the midway course, Icarus was overwhelmed with the ecstasy of flight, and overcome with the feeling of divine power that came with it. Daedalus could only watch in horror as Icarus ascended higher and higher, powerless to change his son's dire fate. When the heat from the sun melted the wax on his wings, Icarus fell from the sky. Just as Daedalus had many times ignored the consequences of defying the natural laws of mortal men in the service of his ego, Icarus was also carried away by his own hubris. In the end, both men paid for their departure from the path of moderation dearly. Icarus with his life, and Daedalus with his regret.
okay. That's part 1. Modernizing the metaphor, I'm going to present to you Louis Slotin, the physicist who played with firecrackers. A question that I had in mind when I prepared this talk was, can our civilization be trusted to manage the planet? This is a question I posed to myself after researching an incident that occurred at the beginning of the atomic age, on May 21st, 1946 to be exact. It's an event that I had heard a possibly apocryphal story about since I was in high school from my father. It was a dramatic event that has thrill and terror in it. It is known as the Slotin criticality experiment, or more accurately, the Slotin criticality demonstration. It was named after Louis Slotin, a young Canadian physicist working at Los Alamos who did the dangerous work of determining the optimum arrangement of plutonium bomb assemblies. I hadn't thought much about it until I found a series of photographs of the room and its equipment where this incident took place, recreated by the sculptor Jim Sanborn. Well, it's here. I can see it. may have to go on without that, but that's going to be a disappointment. See, if you get off the track, then you have to get back on the track. I can see it there. It's very close. It wants me to create a new presentation, and I don't want to do that. I already have it here. Well, I really can't hold you up on that. But what I was going to show you was a photograph of the recreation of this laboratory where Louis Slotin did his experiments. It's by the sculptor Jim Sanborn. It's got all period instrumentation, all vacuum tube amplifier type instrumentation, very old fashioned by today's standards. A lot of cables running along the floor, but it's very dramatically presented. And the room is very clean, which is quite a contrast from the actual physics lab where Slotin did his work. But the reason why Sanborn created this thing was to have a symbolic impact on the viewer. He felt very strongly that this is a signal event that needed to be dramatized. So I'm still hoping that I will get this thing to go at some point, but I can't just sit here and frustrate you all while I try to get it to work. I don't know why all of a sudden it's failing me. Remember that this incident took place after World War II was over. The bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been dropped. Japan had been defeated. The Soviet Union had been forestalled from invading Japan, but had become the new enemy. The world was relieved, but still anxious. Memories were still fresh, and there was great uncertainty politically, militarily, and scientifically about how this new great atomic power was to be used and contained. Meanwhile, work on improving the reliability and effectiveness of atomic bombs that depend on plutonium as the fissionable continued, with momentum carried over from the Manhattan Project and from curiosity. You may ask why. But mentally carry yourself back to that time, and you can imagine it. Just after World War II. 2 people died in the course of doing experimental work on nuclear bombs during this period, both at Los Alamos. The first fatality was that of Henry Daghlian, Slotin's colleague. He accidentally dropped a brick of tungsten carbide into a nest of those bricks surrounding a sphere of plutonium, causing it to release a burst of radiation. The event occurred just 11 days after the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The second death, 9 months later to the day, was Louis Slotin's. Now let's back up a little. What is a criticality experiment? Well, to arrive at an efficient design for the atomic bombs used in World War II, one needed to explore the behavior of fissionable material, uranium-235 or plutonium-239, as the rate of production and absorption of neutrons that they emit approaches the point of creating a sustained chain reaction. The variables involved include the mass of the material, its shape, the external supply of initiating neutrons, and the moderating or reflecting effect of surrounding other materials such as water, beryllium, nickel, and steel. Criticality is measured in terms called a dollar and cents. Louis Slotin was the originator of those terms, which are still in use today. $1 represents the point at which a reaction becomes unstoppable. Today's nuclear power reactors operate at about 80 cents. Slotin knew he was a dead man once he mentally processed what just happened to him in the accident I'm going to describe. And to everyone else in the room at the moment of this blue flash, that he was the closest and the only one to die shortly thereafter. Some others in the room at the time died prematurely many years later. But what is this blue flash or blue light associated with nuclear physics? It's the energy of ionizing radiation affecting water molecules, in this case in the air, water vapor in the air in that room, cause the water molecules to dissociate. And when they immediately recombine, they release energy at the wavelength of blue light. This is commonly known in the field as Cherenkov radiation. And perhaps you've seen pictures of it when you see underwater nuclear reactors going on. You see that blue glow down there? Well, that's the water recombining that had been separated by the gamma radiation that's being emitted by the reactions down there. I've seen that glow in a pool myself. There was where material having been in a nuclear reactor had been placed for it to cool off after it was treated in the reactor. And that's where the short half-life isotopes are allowed to decay. After 6 months or so, it's safe to, with precautions, to process the material further. Louis Slotin was known as the master armorer of nuclear weapons. It was he who assembled the test bomb that was exploded at Alamogordo, New Mexico in July 1945. Less than a month before another bomb just like it was exploded in Nagasaki. Here's a photograph of Slotin standing on the platform of the test bomb in Alamogordo, armoring the bomb. He's inside a canvas tent, protecting him and his colleague from the rays of the New Mexico summer sunlight. So he's the one in dark glasses. But Slotin didn't travel to Tinian to arm the bomb at Nagasaki because he wasn't an American citizen. As I said, he was Canadian. He was scheduled, though, to arm the bomb that was to be used in the Bikini test in 1946, in July of 1946. Slotin was first praised as a hero for taking quick action to stop the chain reaction that occurred when he was doing his test and limit the exposure of 6 others in the room from the blast of gamma rays that it produced. Subsequently, however, he came to be seen as an irresponsible worker who did not follow even the rudimentary safety precautions then in place. Now, a little bit more about Louis Slotin. He seemed to be a spinner of tall tales about himself, which might have been true, but could not be verified, such as being the first to fly a British-made jet, having served in the Spanish Civil War, and so forth. He was swept into the Manhattan Project while holding a job at the University of Chicago. He had a PhD in physics from King's College, London, so very clearly he would be sought after. He was assigned to the Clinton Engineering Works in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where he worked on the scale up of nuclear technology used and needed to build atomic bombs. Now, quoting from a book on nuclear act at Oak Ridge, Slotin gained the reputation of someone who would step over the safety line and take chances that should not be taken. One Friday afternoon, young Lewis wanted the X-10 graphite reactor shut down so he could make some adjustments to his experiments at the bottom of the fuel pool. This fuel pool was a tank of water under the floor at the back of the reactor where hot, very radioactive fuel was dumped to cool off. The chief physics officer, Carl Morgan, nixed the idea. The pile could not possibly be shut down. It was being used as a pilot plant for the plutonium production reactors being built at Hanford, Washington, and the thing had to be run flat out 24/7. Every few days, new fuel was pushed into the front of the reactor, and the burned up fuel, now highly radioactive, would be pushed out the back and dumped into the pool. This is the fuel that now had some uranium transformed into plutonium. The bottom of this fuel pool had to be highly contaminated by now. Continuing, when Morgan returned to work the following Monday, he discovered that Slotin had stripped down to his shorts, dived into the pool, and made adjustments. Morgan was appalled. Slotin was reassigned to Los Alamos in December 1944, where daring was better appreciated. He quickly earned respect for his natural ability to assemble the complicated implosion bomb without excessive worrying and hand-wringing. During the period leading up to the use of the bombs, and for almost a year after, Louis Slotin and his partner, Henry Daghlian, performed a number of criticality experiments, all intended to help arrive at a reliable detonation mechanism, one that used a minimum amount of plutonium, which remained in extremely short supply. These experiments were informally referred to as tickling the dragon. Daghlian, as I mentioned, was the first to die from a criticality accident. Slotin was saddened by Daghlian's death. Nevertheless, he brushed aside advice to automate the procedure and to do it remotely. Enrico Fermi himself warned Slotin that he wouldn't last a year if he kept doing those experiments. He lasted 9 months. In preparation for his departure for the Pacific, Slotin was training a new assistant, a Dr. Graves, in how to conduct these experiments in his absence. Bomb designs were constantly being improved, and by this time, hemispheres of beryllium had replaced the bricks of tungsten carbide in the apparatus. You can see one of them in the photographs that I would like to have shown you. I hope still to be able to do that. But Slotin had begun to grow weary of bomb work. This thing he was working on was to be his last bomb core. So this particular test in May of 1946 was more of a demonstration for his trainees' benefit. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The radiation detectors had been placed around the assembly table and warmed up, and were emitting a steady stream of clicks like nuclear radiation counters do in preparation for the beginning of this demonstration. Three physicists, or three people came up to the apparatus and stood right in front of it. Slotin, Dr. Graves, and another person were right in front of the apparatus. Two other physicists who had been doing experiments elsewhere in the room came over to watch. Another person, a security guard, was standing a few feet away. All told, there were 7 people in the room. Up to this point, work to determine the optimum configuration for the detonator of the bomb had proceeded incrementally. The neutron reflective beryllium hemisphere, here represented by a stainless steel salad bowl, would be held away from the plutonium ball, here the top half of an orange. Be held away by wooden spacers, which would be removed one by one and replaced with thinner ones. At each level, radiation readings would be recorded, and then the hemisphere would drop another level down, and they'd take another series of readings until the hemisphere was flat on the table. Well, if criticality hadn't been approached close enough, it was necessary to machine off some of the beryllium so that the reflector could approach more closely the plutonium when it got to its final lowest resting place. But Slotin used a different technique this time because the test was informal. It was more for the demonstration for the trainees' benefit. Slotin dispensed with the wooden spacers, and holding the hemisphere in his left hand, like this, and with a long shafted screwdriver in his right hand, he levered the reflector up and down. As the reflector was lowered, the intensity of the noise from the radiation detectors would increase. And when he raised it, the noise from the detectors would decrease. So he was going like, kind of like revving a motorcycle. Well, the people watching this demonstration undoubtedly were impressed with the master armorer doing his work. He had the enthusiasm of a sorcerer's apprentice. So here he is going. Well, at one point, the screwdriver got vertical. The whole thing went flat down. There was a sudden increase in noise, a blue flash, and now silence. It's not theoretical anymore. Slotin felt a tingling in his left hand, and he could taste the radiation on his tongue. At the instant of the flash, Slotin must have known he was going to die. What had happened to Henry Daghlian was happening to him. Though Henry hadn't been showing off, Henry was working alone at the time. Louis Slotin died in a hospital 9 days later, his body functions inexorably failing. The progress of his death was recorded and reported in detail with photographs. I've seen some of them. Black skin falling off his face and his arms. Now, I hope to be able to show you this painting by Peter Bruegel, because this is really key. I really hope I can make this work. There. That's the painting by Peter Bruegel of Icarus falling into the sea. Can you find Icarus? He's not the main figure in the painting. The main figure in the painting is the plowman leaning into his plow, trying to plow a straight furrow behind his horse. There's a shepherd looking skyward with his back to the sea, oblivious to what's going on. There's a fisherman down here who may or may not have noticed Icarus splashing into the water. The most bizarre painting. As I thought about it, I found myself saying, people do heroic things, monumental things, even monumentally stupid things. But the rest of mankind may be completely unaware of them or their implications. Now, bringing it up to the modern day, I've listed just a few things I can think of where I think it's questionable whether we're really in control of the technology we have. There's Facebook. There's the search algorithms that decide for you what is most important for you to see first when you do a search. Harvesting personal data that's yours that other people use and sell. You have no control over that, practically. Twitter. You have control of Twitter. Bitcoins. Now, some people understand Bitcoins, but most of us don't. So chances are we could be taken advantage of by the people who do. And that technology could be quite pervasive in the not too distant future. Then there's plundering the ecosystem. This has been going on for quite a time, and now is becoming more apparent since Mr. Trump basically deliberately stopped any attempt to reckon with global warming. Finally, I feel like saying to you that our civilization basically has an unwillingness to place any limits on itself. Now, I did think of a counterexample, the eradication of smallpox. We have managed to eradicate smallpox as a disease on Earth. However, the organism that produces smallpox is still in storage at temperature under international supervision. Where this is harvested. Okay, so we don't have smallpox anymore, but the smallpox organism is still there. Now, if you were in charge of that facility that is storing it, would you be the one who would say, I'm going to destroy my share of this? I expect you to do the same. What is the likelihood of that actually happening? So that's the dilemma we're in. We don't trust one another, and if we're going to survive on the planet, we're going to have to trust ourselves more, each other more than we do now. I invite you to comment on this, to add your own examples, to bring your counterexamples. I'd love to hear from you.
Any questions, folks? First thing I'm thinking about is now you understand why that board that our friend Joe Bader was there to prevent, I think, the kinds of things that this guy did. And they could actually bring criminal prosecutions against somebody who did the kinds of things he did.
Well, it was pretty egregious, but the way it was recorded at the time, Mr. Slotin would a hero for having quickly stopped the chain reaction by throwing the reflector. But he set the situation up through his carelessness, and you could say his oubli. Now, he was showing off. I claim that was not well understood by people at the time. In fact, I'd like to when I was working at the Savannah River, as a summer employee, where my father worked, I was working in the laboratories. I had to get a security clearance to go into the laboratory. I learned that for people who had been noticed to be around radioactive material, you could find a copy of called the acute radiation syndrome in their locker. It was the photographs in it of the 9-day period it took for Slotin to die. The impression I got was the most effective way to get through the operators, ordinary people who work in the facility, how serious it is to work with this material. Yeah.
Actually, I want to just add a couple things. The Slotin, my understanding was that when this happened, he dropped himself on the plutonium sphere to prevent the rest of the room getting contaminated. And plutonium, what releases is a bit of a gamma, but mostly is alpha.
Yeah.
Alpha is a 2 proton, 2 neutron.
Yeah. Right.
And it doesn't penetrate much into the tissue because it's a very big particle and doesn't have that much velocity. The only way plutonium can cause death if you inhale, go to the lung.
Yes, that's true.
That's why I think when he dropped himself on this ball of plutonium 239, which was emitting alpha particle and gamma, he saved other people in the room. So in that regard, I think he is a hero because he saved other people. It was a stupid experiment.
Yeah.
I agree. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say, you said something about smallpox, which is totally correct. But the problem is, just recently, not too long ago, this is from Canada. Canadian virologists were able to manufacture the H1N1 flu virus of 1918 based on the genetic map that they had, because we have, with this technology we have today, we can quickly, in 2 hours, we can decipher the DNA or RNA structure. Based on that, they were able to manufacture a new virus, H1N1, using CRISPR technology. So it is not difficult to manufacture these things. On that list that you mentioned, I would put on the top of it the CRISPR technology, which is a good thing because you can eliminate, let's say, sickle cell, which is done already.
I've heard about that, yes.
But also you can make the superhuman, as they claim, or change the genes so they can make it the way you like. The parents of the future, they want their children the way they like. So I think these are the major threat. As technology goes on and on and on, we are getting more and more trouble in the hand of people who can abuse this technology.
That's why the myth of Daedalus and Icarus is so germane to this situation. Yeah,
I think that I agree fully with it. Thank you.
It's definitely true that plutonium by itself, in a subcritical state, is just an alpha emitter, and it can be stopped by just a sheet of plastic. In fact, when my father retired from the Savannah River plant, he was given a lozenge of lead, which represented the shape of a plutonium button that his outfit manufactured at Savannah River plant and sent out to Rocky Flats to be made into bombs. Well, he didn't want to even take that thing home.
He says, what if people see this and they say, I could be accused of being a terrorist? And they said, Jim, it's not warm, because plutonium gives off some heat too. See? So this is this lead, it's cold. Well, they convinced my father that they weren't going to let him go home unless he took it with him, because I think they really wanted to kind of stick it to him as kind of like a part of a retirement party. It was kind of a little game he had that the other workers played on him. But I have that button at home someplace that I've inherited, and I don't want to get it out. It's in a plastic bag. It weighs a lot, you know. But it's a memory of what my father did for many, many years safely. He died when he was 90. He died of mesothelioma from having been smoking a lot during the war and breathing a lot of asbestos dust where the construction was going on at Hanford. He undoubtedly got exposed to a lot of asbestos. But he lived to a ripe old age, and all the people that worked for him felt very safe around him. And so part of why this story grabs me so much is it's such a contrast from the way my father treated nuclear radiation. He was deadly serious about it. Yeah.
We didn't know then that much about the medical hazard of the radiation.
No.
Up until when we studied the Japanese experience and then the leukemia and death, all these things.
Yeah.
But the pioneers, like Enrico Fermi died at age 51 or 52 from gastric cancer, which unquestionably was related to working in a lab with the physics lab, working with all these radioisotope radioactive. Oppenheimer, which was the father of the atomic bomb in Los Alamos, from Berkeley, he died from lung cancer, again related to the radiation.
Yeah, he smoked a lot too.
And of course, many people died because we didn't know the hazard of radiation. As this Louis was looks like just a toy.
Yeah.
I mean, the way he was treating this thing.
Yeah, right.
We didn't know what the hazard of
Yeah.
things are.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes, so many people died, and unfortunately, the worst I think is the experience in the nuclear explosion, nuclear accident in
Chernobyl?
Chernobyl. I mean, so many people died. 23 people died from the radiation on the first night in the Chernobyl accident.
Yes.
Yeah, I think people were convinced our friend Joe died from brain tumor that was related to all the years and years and years that he worked with nuclear stuff.
Wow.
Here's Mike. Dave's got a question.
Okay.
Hey, Jack, because I understand that there are probably the thousands of nurses who were, especially at at forward line hospitals, triage hospitals, suffered blindness from just the kind of primitive X-rays.
Sure.
In fact, my father was in the war, had a good friend who was a physician, and his wife was one of the nurses, and we visited them quite often. It was really sad. In the 1960s.
Yes.
Probably 15 years after the war, she was
yes.
quickly losing her vision.
There was a lot of lessons we could have learned that we didn't. In fact, you probably remember when you were young, you could stick your feet into a fluoroscope at a shoe store and see an X-ray of your feet.
Yeah.
And my friend whose father was in the same business as my father's said, I don't think this is such a good idea. Well, there was a fad of that for about 6 months, and all of a sudden those fluoroscopes were gone. Yes.
Anyone else here have any questions? Who? Ross? Hey, Ross.
Stories about the ladies who worked making watches.
Yes.
And having the glow watches.
Yes, the radium dials.
Yes.
Yes. Well, Pierre Curie was already starting to suffer a lot from the radiation that he was carrying around with him in his pocket. He had some radium in his pocket that he kept just for showing, that was definitely creating lesions on his skin, and he was not going to live much longer, even though he was run over by a runaway cart on the streets of Paris. Yeah.
But his wife, Madame Curie, also died from
Yes.
leukemia.
Yes. She wasn't that old. Yeah.
Working with the uranium, with the radium.
Yes. Yes. So, but we think about what's going on now with technology that's even newer, where our information is more scanty. It seems like the Greek advice of pursuing the middle way seems appropriate. But what is the middle way? You know, that begs the question. Now, if you're a corporate person interested in profit, the middle way moves this way. If you're interested in community safety, the middle way moves in another direction. So that's a question I'm going to leave you.
Do we have any other questions? If not, I want to thank you again, Jack, for your presentation. We appreciate it very much. Now, next month, our man David McMurrow has got a tremendous presentation on St. Patrick's Day of all days, March 17th, about the god-awful penal laws that the English imposed on the Irish in the end of the 17th century. My ancestors were on both sides of that, so they were both the oppressors and the oppressed. So I'm interested in hearing it. Yeah, there's a lot of that. So I'm looking forward to it. So thank you all for coming tonight. Hope to see you again next month.